لله رب العالمين وبه نستعين ونصلي ونسلم على أفضل الخلق أجمعين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما يا رب العالمين. ربي يسر ولا تعسر وتمم بالخير وبك نستعين يا فتاح. ربي يسر ولا تعسر وتمم بالخير وبك نستعين يا فتاح. ربي يسر ولا تعسر وتمم بالخير وبك نستعين يا فتاح. So today, inshallah, we're going to start with the first lesson of this beautiful book, which is known as Musallam al-Thubūt. And we'll start off speaking a little bit regarding the author and the book itself. And then after that, inshallah ta'ala, we'll start with the Muqaddimah. So the author, he is Al-Allama Muhibbullah bin Abd al-Shakur al-Uthmani al-Siddiqi al-Hanafi al-Bihari, who passed away in the year 1119 after Hijrah. And his laqab is al-Bihari, and this is in attribution to Bihar, and Bihar is from the lands of al-Hind. And he's also known as al-Qadi. And later on, towards the end of his life, after he was granted the main the chief judge, the Qadi al-Qudat, when he accepted the Sadara of the different cities in India and their court system, at that time he was given the laqab of Fadil Khan. Fadil Khan. He was born in the city of Kara, which is from the lands of Bihar, in the lands of Bihar, and his family is known as Malik. Now we don't know exactly the date that he was born. There's no mentioning in the books of Tarajim exactly regarding which date he was born, but we do know that he passed away in the year 1119, and that was an exact year as well where he was promoted to this post, which is being the main qadi, the main judge that overlooks all of the courts in al-Hind. From a young age, he was inclined towards and knowledge and his studies. And this is one thing that you're going to find, which is common amongst many of the great ulama that attain great ranks in the past, is that from a young age you will find that they have within them nubul, which is excellence and an inclination and a yearning to seek. So he started studying his initial studies. He studied upon many mashayikh, but from the main mashayikh that he studied from at a young age was Qutbuddin ibn Abd al-Halim al-Ansari al-Sihalwi. And after studying a few books with him, the main scholar he studied the most from, he is Al-Allama Qutbuddin al-Husayni al-Shams Abadi. Al-Shams Abadi. طيب. Then he went towards the main area of Sultan Alamgir, who's in the lands of Deccan. And Deccan is Iqlim. It's an entire area in the southern part of India. In the southern part of India, and within it there are many different manatiq and wilayat. So this was the capital at that time of the Muslim Empire in India, and the main king was a Sultan Alamgir. So he goes towards this location, and he is mulazim of a Sultan Muhammad, who is known as Shah Alamgir. So he stays with him. And after Shah Alamgir had attained al-Hukm, which is leadership, he made Muhibbullah bin Abd al-Shakur al-Bihari a qadi in the city of Lucknow. وجرت بينه وبين بعض علمائها مباحثات ومطارحات. And while he was a qadi in the city of Lucknow, he had ulama over there in that city, where they would have niqash ilmi and hiwar ilmi, different discussions regarding Islamic knowledge. So our author Muhibbullah al-Bihari, rahimahullah ta'ala, even though he was in qada, and he was in tadris as well, but at the same time he would spend his free time compiling works in ta'lif and tasnif. And after some time, he was transferred to the Qada in Hyderabad. Okay. And after this, the king himself did azal, and he removed him from Qada, and he was so pleased with him that he made him direct tutor, a teacher of his grandson, who was known as Rafi' al-Qadr bin Shah Alam bin Alamgir. And his grandson, who was still young at that time, Shah Alamgir, the king, he made Sheikh Muhibbullah al-Bihari, Al-Allama Muhibbullah al-Bihari, the private teacher of his grandson. And when Shah Alam, so the son of Alamgir, when Shah Alam was made a wali upon the lands of Kabul, okay, so his father, Alamgir, who was the main ruler of the Islamic Empire at that time in India, after the empire had expanded and Kabul, any parts of Afghanistan had also entered under that empire, he sent his son, and Alamgir sent his son Shah Alam as a wali upon the lands of Kabul. So he took with him, yani Shah Alam took with him Al-Qadi Muhibbullah bin Abd al-Shakur, along with his son. Yani Shah Alam is the father of Rafi' al-Qadr, right? So, and Rafi' al-Qadr is the student of Muhibbullah al-Bihari. So he stays there for quite some time. And in the year 1118, the father, the main father, Alamgir, Shah Alamgir, he passes away. And his son, Shah Alam, is now the next ruler of the entire Indian subcontinent and that area, that Islamic empire that was there at that time. And in this year, Shah Alam promoted Muhibbullah al-Bihari, Al-Allama Muhibbullah al-Bihari, and granted him the post of As-Sadara al-Uzma, and he gave him the laqab of Fadil Khan. So in the year, Shah Alam, the son of Alamgir, became the main king in the year 1118. And right after he becomes a king, he appoints Muhibbullah al-Bihari as, he grants him As-Sadara al-Uzma and gives him the laqab of Fadil Khan in the year 1119, and that's the same year he passed away. So he didn't remain upon this post for a long time, in fact, maybe months. And then he passed away, rahimahullah ta'ala. Now, from his shuyukh, we mentioned two, and these are the only two shuyukh that are mainly mentioned in the books of Tarajim, who are Qutbuddin al-Shahid bin Abdul Halim al-Ansari al-Sahalwi and Qutbuddin al-Shams Abadi al-Husayni. Okay, we don't have mentioning of other shuyukh for Al-Allama Muhibbullah bin Abd al-Shakur al-Bihari. And likewise, we don't have the mentioning of his students as well, except for the one who is the Hafid, the grandson of Shah Alamgir, who is known as Rafi' al-Qadr. And the reason for this is simple. Like we went through his life. He was basically close to the kings throughout his entire life. And usually, someone who is granted high posts of Qada, they don't have as much time to individually teach, students, to have students that are mulazim of them. And they're focused more on matters like Qada and whatnot. So, likewise, we see that we don't have, a mentioning of his students other than Rafi' al-Qadr bin Shah Alam bin Alamgir. From his Musannafat, he has many works, and mainly the most important works of his is, number one, he has a work in al-Mantiq which is known as Sullamul Ulum fil Mantiq. Sullamul Ulum. And Sullamul Ulum is one of the advanced texts in Mantiq that is still taught in some parts of the world today. Usually in the Indian subcontinent, in certain madaris, they'll start off with, for example, al-Mirqat, and then they'll do Sharh al-Tahdhib, and then they'll do al-Qutbiyya, so Sharh upon al-Risala al-Shamsiyya, and then they will do Sullamul Ulum fil Mantiq. And possibly in some madaris they might even do Shuruh of Sullamul Ulum. So this is one of the more advanced works in Mantiq. And to be honest, the majority of the world, they're not teaching this work anymore, even in madaris in the Indian subcontinent now. Just like his book Al-Musallam fi Usul al-Fiqh, likewise his work in Mantiq, Sullamul Ulum, is normally not taught anymore. And then he has Musallam al-Thubūt fi Usul al-Fiqh. And upon this work, Musallam al-Thubūt, he has a hashiyah that he himself compiled upon this work, al-Musallam fi usul al-fiqh. And he also has a risala which is known as al-Jawhar al-Fard fi mabhath al-juz' alladhi la yatajazza. Okay, again, this is a philosophical discussion. Is there something which is known as al-Jawhar al-Fard or al-juz' alladhi la yatajazza or not? This is a philosophical discussion, and he has a risala in this topic. And he also has the risala في المغالطات العامة الورود or العامة الورود. A risala regarding the logical fallacies that are commonly found between people. And he also has the risala في إثبات, this is a really interesting one, رسالة في إثبات أن مذهب الحنفية أبعد عن الرأي من مذهب الشافعية على خلاف ما اشتهر. He has a risala. Now طبعا يا أحباب, don't misunderstand, this author is a mujtahid in usul al-fiqh. And we're going to see that in his book, in his work, in al-Musallam, he mentions in the beginning, he says that I'm not gonna give tarjih just to opinions just because I'm a Hanafi. Rather, I will do it based on what's correct, what I feel is rajih. So he had attained the level of, or he was at a level where he was doing ijtihad in matters of usul al-fiqh. So he had a very strong understanding of how the Hanafi madhab works, as well as a very strong understanding of how the Shafi'i madhab works. And we're going to mention, inshallah, some of the works that he references in this book when he compiled this book. Okay, so he understood how these madahib work. So it'd be interesting to read what he mentions in this risala as to why he feels that the Hanafi madhab is actually more distant from Ra'i compared to the Shafi'i madhab. And what are the main points that he uses to support this claim. Okay, there are many ulama that have praised him. لقد نال العلامة ابن عبد الشكور ثناء علماء عصره عليه ومن بعدهم. Okay, so for example, العلامة صديق حسن خان القنوجي, he says ثم انقطع برمته إلى حوزة القطب الشمس آبادي فصار بحرا من العلوم وبدرا من النجوم وبين النجوم. Sadiq Hassan Khan was a very famous scholar who affiliates with the methodology of Ahlul Hadith in India. And his teacher is Sayyid Nadir Hussain al-Dihlawi. And Sayyid Nadir Hussain al-Dihlawi today is one of the ones that has the highest chains in Sahih al-Bukhari, because he was a student of Shah Muhammad Ishaq. He was a student of Shah Muhammad Ishaq, and he himself says that I actually read the entire Sahih Bukhari upon Shah Muhammad Ishaq. Although there are other Hanafi scholars at that time that felt that he didn't read Sahih Bukhari upon Shah Muhammad Ishaq. And since that time, because of the ta'assub between the Hanafiya and the tanafur, the differences between the Hanafiya and the Ahlul Hadith in India, since that time there was a debate in his lifetime whether the Hanafiya would deny this, that he didn't recite or read Sahih Bukhari upon his teacher, and other scholars would say he did. He himself would say he did, and his students would also say he did. Like Sadiq Hassan Khan in his tarjama, he mentions that my teacher read Sahih Bukhari upon Shah Muhammad Ishaq. And the asl in this ahbab is that if the scholar himself is saying that he read it, you don't have to look at the written asanid, because madarul isnad ala al-amana. Madarul isnadi ala al-amana. So if a scholar himself says, I read the entire book upon my teacher, okay, but then when you look at the written version of the ijazah, okay, you find that the written version of the ijazah says that he only read the atraf. So which one do you trust over here? Do you trust the written version? It's possible the written version he attained it before he recited the entire Bukhari upon that teacher. So that's why we say that the asl is that if someone claims that he read an entire book upon a certain shaykh, then the asl, al-aslu fi as-sama' or madaruhu ala al-amana. Madaruhu ala al-amana. If we're looking for written ijazat, then unfortunately we're going to be throwing out half the asanid. We're going to be throwing them out the window, right? Because having a written isnad is not always present. So, طيب, على كل حال, Sadiq Hassan Khan, he was from the scholars of the Ahlul Hadith, and he says he's praising this Allama. And at that time, Ahbab, why was I mentioning this? Is that the Ahlul Hadith scholars also used to study mantiq and falsafa. This is only recently that there are a group of scholars that have said that studying all of this is haram, or they've distanced themselves from it. But if you look at the Tarajim or Tarjama of Sayyid Nadir Hussain, he says that I studied all of these books. So they used to study mantiq, they used to study falsafa, they used to study these works. And then even after that, they would debate in certain aspects. And they used to study usul al-fiqh as well. So it's only recently that you find this, I guess, this distancing that you find in the scholars of, or some of the ones that affiliate with that manhajiyah, from these works, or the idea of studying mantiq or usul al-fiqh or kalam and whatnot. طيب. ويقول صاحب كتاب نزهة الخواطر الشيخ العالم الكبير العلامة محب الله ابن عبد الشكور أحد الأذكياء المشهورين في الآفاق. And another scholar he mentions, he says الفقيه الحنفي الأصولي المنطقي البحاثة المحقق. And he is a محقق فعلا. Okay, and just like Ibn al-Humam, Al-Kamal Ibn al-Humam rahimahullah ta'ala, in his works, he has At-Tahrir in Usul al-Fiqh, in which he also gives tarjih based on what he feels is correct and not necessarily based on what the Hanafi madhab specifically says. Okay. Likewise, Al-Allama Muhibbullah al-Bihari, and he was a muhaqqiq. Likewise, Al-Allama Muhibbullah bin Abd al-Shakur al-Bihari also gives tarjih based on what he feels is correct and not necessarily because he was upon the Hanafi madhab, so he's always going to give tarjih to the Hanafi madhab. طيب. لكن there's ifrat and tafrit in this matter, أحباب. And I just might mention this as a side point over here. Scholars that reach a very high level of ilm, most definitely they will be giving tarjih in certain matters, in certain masail. So for example, you had the likes of Sa'duddin al-Taftazani. We mentioned he was a mujtahid in usul al-fiqh as well as usul al-din. Likewise, you had Al-Kamal Ibn al-Humam. He would do ijtihad in these matters. Likewise, you had Muhibbullah al-Bihari. He would do ijtihad in these matters, but then they would also prove it. So it wasn't a matter of just doing ijtihad. When you look at their works, what have they compiled? Look at their resume. Look at what Sa'duddin al-Taftazani has compiled, and look at the way he compiles these works. Look at Ibn al-Humam. Look at all of what he has compiled, and look at how much idrak. Try and understand Ahbab al-Tahrir, Ibn al-Humam. It's al-Ghaz. It's like riddles. It's Ibn al-Humam, his kalam is very mu'aqqad, very difficult to understand in some of his more advanced books. Okay, literally as if he's compiling in riddles. And at times it doesn't even seem like it's Arabic. The way he does the usloob of the kalam. Very difficult to understand. So when you read their works and you come across some of their advanced works, you realize the amount of knowledge that they had in order for them to then say that, okay, you know what, I'm going to adopt a certain opinion in this matter based on my own personal tahqiq. And then they would prove it. If they prefer one opinion over the other, they would mention the proofs of each opinion, and then they would themselves present proofs that no one had mentioned before them to prove the opinion that was correct, or to prove the opinion that they had adopted to be correct. And likewise, you're going to see Muhibbullah al-Bihari, he does this often. So he'll take a proof that's mentioned, for example, by Ibn al-Humam, or he'll take a proof that's mentioned by Ibn al-Hajib, and he'll do rad upon it and reword it, or possibly present a rad upon it and present another approach for the opposing opinion. So they had reached that level of ilm. فَنُسَلِّمُ لَهُمْ هَذَا الْأَمْرِ. And to say that they should not have done the tahqiq or the ijtihad that they had done would be degrading of their rank, and it wouldn't be justice towards them. And then you have the opposite, where it's like every random student that hasn't studied, or if you look at the books he studied and how much he has studied, you'll find that he hasn't studied he hasn't even studied maybe 2 or 3 levels in the different sciences and the different alat, and yet he wants to claim that he's going to do ijtihad and look at everything from a skeptical perspective, and approach all of these works with an open mindset. So we say over there, this is also dhulm. Okay, this is dhulm, and it's not correct. So the middle path is what is correct. There are some individuals that reach that level of ilm, and they are worthy of doing ijtihad, and they will do ijtihad in certain matters, in certain ulum. And there are some ulama, okay, they might be talabatul ilm, okay, advanced talabatul ilm, but they haven't reached that level of ilm, and they don't have the shumul that is needed for ijtihad. So for them we say that it's better that they don't open this door, and they don't represent this claim of ijtihad. And we also say that in front of the awam, mentioning in front of the ammatun nas, or the beginner levels, the beginning students, the students that are still at the initial level of talabul ilm, mentioning in front of them that ijtihad is something which is praiseworthy and you should approach everything with a skeptical mindset and you are free to understand, that is not wise at all. And that will be a destruction for ilm as opposed to benefiting ilm. طيب. Now, when we speak about the book, number one, this work is not actually called Musallam al-Thubūt. The author, when he compiled this work, he called it al-Musallam. And he mentions in the Muqaddimah that the reason he called it Musallam was taking a good omen in that name. بأن يسلم عن الطرح والجرح. He himself says in the Muqaddimah that the book be saved or protected from tarh and jarh, from others coming in and finding faults within this work that he has compiled. And he mentions this in the Muqaddimah. That's why he calls it al-Musallam, tafa'ulan. And after he had compiled the book, he noticed that if he were to that the year that he compiled the book, we finished compilation of the book, which was the year 1109, if he calculated based on the hisab of al-Jummal, which is how they calculate these dates into words, okay, it would if he calculated or if he took Musallam al-Thubūt and converted it into numbers, then it would equate to the year where he finished the book, which is 1109. 1109. So it's tarikh, the date upon which he finished this work, is Musallam al-Thubūt. And Musallam al-Thubūt equates to 1109 when you calculate it using the hisab of al-Jummal. طيب. So we say ليس قصد المؤلف من إرادة اسم المسلم الثبوت هو إثبات الاسم للكتاب وإنما بيان التاريخ. Okay, that's why you'll find some of the scholars who have compiled shuruh upon this book, they don't mention the book's name to be Musallam al-Thubūt. Rather, they just call it al-Musallam. They just called it al-Musallam. طيب. Now, regarding the ihtimam of Ahlul Ilm with this work, which is al-Musallam, انتشر كتاب المسلم انتشارا واسعا حتى صار متداولا بين العلماء وطلاب العلم تدريسا وشرحا وتعليقا، فكان محلا للاهتمام البالغ من الجميع، بل لقد صار مقررا دراسيا يدرس في معاهد العلم الشرعي في الهند وخارج الهند. قال أبو الحسن الندوي رحمه الله، يشد رحمه الله، أصبح الشغل الشاغل للعلماء والأذكياء في شبه القارة الهندية تدريسا وتفهيما وشرحا وتحشية في أكثر من قرن. For over 100 years, this work was one of the greatest works in the Indian subcontinent, which was taught, and scholars will write hawashi upon it and do sharh upon it and teach it and try and understand the alghaz which are within this book. And it was taught for quite some time in al-Azhar as well. For quite some time in al-Azhar as well, and in some of the lands of the Arab lands. And one of my one of the mashayikh that I've met and I've studied from in Afghanistan, he used to tell me that Sheikh Hasibullah, he used to tell me that in Afghanistan they would go to scholars and they would present some ibarat or some text from Musallam al-Thubūt, and they ask him to explain it. And the scholar that would be able to explain it, they would say, okay, this person is a real alim. He can explain what this book is saying. Okay, and you'll see some of the matters that are presented or some of the discussions in this book are difficult to understand. Very difficult, very mu'aqqad. So the scholar who is continuously doing mutala'a of this work will be able to understand what the author is saying. Otherwise, he has no idea what the author is saying. So they will use this as a test to determine who an alim is. And this idea of testing ulama and their ilm was common in the past as well. When Imam Bukhari rahimahullah ta'ala entered Baghdad, they tested him. They tested their hifl. And this is the default when it comes to determining who an alim is. This is how you do tazkiyah of an alim. Or you determine ulama by testing them, putting them on the spot to see how much ilm they actually contain, or how much ilm they actually have, and not looking at degrees and certificates. These shahadat, ahbab, these degrees have destroyed the standards of ilm. They've destroyed the standards of ilm. The ulama are the ones that embody ilm and they carry themselves with ilm, and ilm is within their hearts, not the ones that attain a degree and then they've never returned to those books ever again in their life. طيب. يقول عبد العلي الأنصاري صاحب الفواتح وهو من أعرف الناس بهذا المتن المبارك: وكان كتاب المسلم من بينها مختصرة مؤسسا على قواعد المعقول واقعا في معارك الفحول وتلقي من بينها بالقبول حتى طارت به الآفاق الدبور حتى طارت به إلى الآفاق الدبور والقبول. نعم. And other scholars have praised this work as well. Now, what are the shuruh and hawashi that we have upon this work? So number one, most important, is the hashiyah of the author himself. The hashiyah of the author himself. However, this hashiyah, at times the author, rahimahullah ta'ala, in this hashiyah, he is referring to specific discussions that are mentioned in some of the shuruh of al-Mukhtasar, Ibn al-Hajib. And sometimes, he refers to discussions that are not actually related to the work or the book itself. So it's not simply an explanation of what's mentioned in the book. Rather, beyond that, at times he goes beyond that and starts discussing matters which are not even, referenced in the actual matan itself. So the hashiyah is an addition. There are mabahith in the hashiyah that are additional mabahith that he doesn't actually mention in the work itself. طيب. We also have شرح مسلم الثبوت للشيخ أحمد عبد الحق اللكنوي. And we have شرح مسلم الثبوت للشيخ عبد الحق بن فضل حق الخيرابادي. And you have شرح مسلم الثبوت لمحمد حسن بن غلام مصطفى اللكنوي. And we also have one of the largest shuruh that have been compiled upon Musallam, which is known as al-Fawaid al-Uzma, شرح مسلم الثبوت لنظام الدين بن قطب الدين السهالوي الأنصاري. And he is the father of Abdul Ali al-Ansari, who also has a sharh, which is the most famous sharh, which is known as Fawatih al-Rahmut. So Abdul Ali al-Ansari, okay, the author of Fawatih al-Rahmut, his father, who is Nizamuddin ibn Qutbuddin al-Sahalwi al-Ansari, also has a sharh upon Musallam al-Thubūt. And if you remember, one of the mashayikh of the author was Qutbuddin al-Sahalwi al-Ansari. طيب. نعم. We also have another sharh, which is known as كشف المبهم مما في المسلم محمد بشير الدين بن محمد كريم الدين العثماني القنوجي. And this is also a very nice sharh. However, it is naqis, it is incomplete. And we also have نفائس الملكوت شرح مسلم الثبوت لولي الله ابن حبيب الله اللكنوي. And we have إزالة الرهبوت عن مشكلات المسلم الثبوت لمحمد أنور البدخشاني, which is also incomplete. It's also incomplete. Why? Because in the curriculum, which is known as Dars al-Nizami, they don't actually complete the work. Rather, they don't even finish 1/4 of the work. Only the beginning parts, the beginning mabadi, are studied. So, Sheikh Muhammad Anwar al-Badakhshani, he used to teach this work. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward him. And so he has a sharh which is compiled, إزالة الرهبوت and مشكلات مسلم الثبوت. And he mentioned in it that he benefited from the previous works as well as Tawdih, Tanqih, and At-Talwih, and other works that were previously compiled upon this book. Like, what's the manhaj of the author, rahimahullah ta'ala, the manhaj of the musannif? So number one, we say يخالف الحنفية أحيانا. He disagrees with the Hanafiya at times. Okay, this is something which we find quite common in this work. And like I said, the author himself, he mentions in the beginning of his Hashia that he will give preference to opinions based on what he considers to be correct, not necessarily because he's a Hanafi, he's always going to give preference to the Hanafi opinion. Also, he mentioned in his Hashia that he had certain books with him while he was compiling this work. From the books of the Hanafiya, he says that he had al-Usul or Kanz al-Wusul lil-Imam al-Bazdawi, and he had Usul al-Sarakhsi, and he had Kashf al-Asrar or نعم upon al-Bazdawi, and he had Kashf al-Manar, يعني Kashf al-Asrar upon al-Manar, the sharh compiled by the author himself, al-Nasafi rahimahullah ta'ala, al-Barakat al-Nasafi. And he also had al-Badi' Badi' al-Nizam al-Jami' bayna Usul al-Bazdawi wal-Ihkam libn al-Sa'ati, which was the first work, as we mentioned, which was compiled in al-Muqaran or al-Jama' bayna al-Madrasatayn. And he also had the sharh of al-Badi' which was compiled by Sirajuddin Abi Hafs Umar ibn Ishaq al-Hindi al-Ghaznawi, as well as al-Tawdih wal-Talwih and al-Tahrir, and the sharh of Tahrir by Ibn Amir al-Hajj, al-Taqrir wal-Tahbir. And he also had Taysir al-Tahrir, another sharh of al-Tahrir li Amir Badshah. And from the books of the Shafi'iyya, he had al-Mahsul of al-Imam al-Razi and al-Ihkam lil-Amidi. And al-Ihkam lil-Amidi. If you remember, we mentioned that these two works, al-Mahsul lil-Imam al-Razi and al-Ihkam lil-Amidi, they are the two that basically summarized the works that were before them in Usul al-Fiqh ala tariqat al-Mutakallimin. And he had with him the sharh of al-Mukhtasar, the sharh of Mukhtasar ibn al-Hajib of al-Qadi al-Iji. And he had multiple shuruh upon this sharh. So the Hashi of al-Jurjani, Sayyid Sharif al-Jurjani, he has a sharh or a Hashi upon the sharh of al-Iji. So he had that with him, as well as the ta'liqat of al-Abhari upon sharh al-Iji, and Taftazani, his work, sharh al-Iji. And also he had with him the Hashi of al-Fadil Mirza Jan ala sharh al-Iji. And he also, if you remember, there was one famous book we mentioned is Al-Rudud wal-Nuqud Sharh Mukhtasar ibn Hajib li Akmal al-Din al-Babarti al-Hanafi. And he also had with him Al-Minhaj lil-Baydawi and the Sharh al-Minhaj by al-Isnawi. And so you actually find in this work many times he'll be doing rudud upon some of these scholars and some of the things that they've mentioned. So for example, Al-Mirza Jan, he mentions him often, and he mentions Ibn al-Humam as well. He mentions sometimes Ibn al-Hajib as well, and he mentions At-Taftazani as well. If he finds that they might have mentioned a point or a very specific idea that is not necessarily in his mind or according to him accurate, then he would do rad upon them. Although he does this at times without actually mentioning what the author, like At-Taftazani, said. So just mention it as a side point, and you won't understand what he's referring to unless you know that, or unless you go back to the actual, for example, Ibara or the actual text which was mentioned by Mirza Jan or At-Taftazani or Ibn al-Hajib rahimahullah ta'ala, for example. So you won't have any understanding of what he's referring to without going back to the actual text which is mentioned by these ulama in their works. And from the books of the Malikiyah, he says he had Al-Mukhtasar and Al-Muntaha. And we mentioned Ibn al-Hajib rahimahullah ta'ala, he had two Mukhtasarat that he compiled. Number one, or one of them was Al-Muntaha, and the other one was Al-Mukhtasar. And he himself said that as for the Hanabila, he does not have a book which was compiled by the Hanabila in Usul al-Fiqh, or he did not have a book which he could reference of the Hanabila in Usul al-Fiqh. طيب, at times, the author, rahimahullah ta'ala, in his work, he will do rad upon the author of Muhkam al-Usul. Muhkam al-Usul was a book compiled by Al-Allama Al-Hafiz Amanullah Banarisi. And this author, the author of Muhkam al-Usul, is from the students of Fadil Mirza Jan, who had a Hashi upon Sharh al-Iji. So the author, yani Muhibbullah al-Bihari, at times he will be rad upon al-Banarisi, author of Muhkam al-Usul, as well as Fadil Mirza Jan. Often he does rad upon Fadil Mirza Jan. طيب, after Muhibbullah, al-Alam Muhibbullah bin Abdul Shakur al-Bihari compiled his work, which is Musallam al-Thubūt, there was another scholar that came, who is Al-Fadil Habibullah al-Qandahari. He was a great alim in both usul al-din and usul al-fiqh. And he authored a work which is known as Mughtanam al-Usul. And in this work, he at times does rad upon al-Bihari, the author of Musallam al-Thubūt. Okay. And Allama Anwar Shah Kashmiri, he has a ta'liq upon Mughtanam al-Usul. Also, you'll find that the author, at times, as we mentioned, he will do rad upon the Hashiyah of al-Iji, upon Mukhtasar al-Hajib, as well as upon Ibn al-Humam. He does rad upon Ibn al-Humam as well, in certain masail. And at times he will, instead of mentioning the mas'ala mantiqiyya, he'll just reference it. He'll say, in Sullam we explained, and then he'll mention one part or the mahallul istishhar from that mas'ala, and he will reference a mas'ala that he had mentioned in Sullam al-Ulum in mantiq. Now the book itself, in the beginning of the book, he has in al-Maqalat al-Ula is في المبادئ الكلامية. The first maqala is in al-Mabadi al-Kalami, has an introduction which has to do with kalam, ahbab. And in this introduction which has to do with kalam, he's mentioning masail kalamiyya. Okay. The second maqala is regarding al-ahkam. And in al-ahkam he has 4 abwab. Number 1, الباب الأول في الحاكم، والباب الثاني في الحكم، والباب الثالث في المحكوم فيه وهو الفعل، والباب الرابع في المحكوم عليه وهو المكلف. And this is exactly in line with how the books of the mutakallimin are. Okay, they will have a muqaddimah regarding al-ahkam, and they will speak about these 4, which is al-hakim, al-hukum, al-mahkum fi, al-mahkum alayh. And in this as well, in some of them he will bring masail kalamiyya. So for example, the mas'ala of tahsin taqbih, the mas'ala of shukr al-mun'im, the mas'ala of different masail kalamiyya he'll mention in these abwab as well. طيب, المقالة الثالثة is في المبادئ اللغوية. And in that he has 6 فصول. Now طبعا in the actual madaris, they normally, some madaris might only teach al-mabadi al-kalamiyya, that's it. Some madaris will go beyond that, for example, and they'll teach from al-maqalat al-thani, they'll teach al-hakim and al-hukum, and they'll stop there, or they'll teach al-mahkum fi and they'll stop there. And some madaris will finish up teaching al-mahkum alayh as well. Okay. But they won't continue beyond into al-mabadi al-lughawiyya. And you'll see why, inshallah. You'll see the book is a very packed book, and it requires a long time to study and understand this work. If you really want to go into the detail of how he has authored and compiled this work. طيب, his المقالة الثالثة is في المبادئ اللغوية. And in that we have 6 فصول. الفصل الأول اشتقاق المفرد وجموده. الفصل الثاني المشترك وغيره. الفصل الثالث تعريف الحقيقة وتقسيمها. الفصل الرابع الكلام على المفرد بالقياس إلى لفظ آخر. الفصل الخامس تقسيم المفرد إلى عام وخاص. الفصل السادس الأمر. And this also is more in line with the طريقة المتكلمين. The book in general, ahbab, is more in line with طريقة المتكلمين, not the method of the ahnaf. Yani the order that you're finding in Manar, or the order that you had, for example, in Usul al-Shashi or in al-Husami. This work is not upon that order. طيب, المقالة الرابعة is where he starts with the actual adillah. So the al-asl al-awwal, which is al-kitab. Okay, this is an al-maqalة الرابعة, and then followed by as-sunnah, followed by al-ijma', and then al-qiyas. And al-maqalة al-khamisah, he ends off with adab al-munadhara wal-ijtihad. And again, this is very much in line with the order and the tartib of the books according to the mutakallimin. طيب, we'll stop here inshallah, and we'll continue in the next class.